This is On Spirit Today. Welcome to the first episode of On Spirit Today. I'm Bruce, host of the show, and I'd love to take this chance to tell you about our podcast. On the show, we'll be talking to people who've experienced incredible events in their lives, many of which cannot be adequately explained by science. These are events that have led to spiritual growth, soul evolution, and transformation. More specifically, we'll be talking to people who have had spiritually transformative experiences. These could include revelations during past life regression, mystical experiences, awakenings during meditation, as well as experiences that accompanied a traumatic event, such as near-death experiences. We'll be hearing directly from these amazing people about what they felt, what they saw, what they learned, and how we can take what they tell us and use it as a catalyst for change and personal growth in our own lives. On the show, we'll also be talking to scholars in the field who will share their research findings with us to shed more light on the matters we discuss. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can watch us on the On Spirit Today Facebook and Instagram pages, and you can watch us on YouTube. Stay with us now for our first episode, an interview with near-death experiencer David Ditchfield. Get ready for an absolutely awesome story that can teach us important lessons about personal growth, life purpose, and soul evolution. Here's part one of the two-part interview. Hello and welcome to On Spirit Today. I'm Bruce, your host, and it's a pleasure having you with us. We have a great show for you today. Our guest is David Ditchfield. David, thanks for being with us and welcome to the show.
Pleasure. Good to meet you, Bruce.
All right, thanks. David is a painter, a musician, a composer, an author, and a near-death experiencer. He had a life-changing event in 2006, which he writes about in his book, Shine On. I have only an e-copy of the book. David, do you happen to have a hard copy of the book within arm's reach?
I've got it. Yeah, here we go.
Okay, thanks.
On my little coffee table there. Can you see that?
Okay, great. An amazing book.
Copy, yeah.
Great. And if I'm not mistaken, that is your own artwork on the cover, is it not?
Yes, I think it had to be really. I had to end up putting it on there. So, yeah.
Indeed, with the incredible talents that you now have in painting, it's not surprising. It's very appropriate that it should be heard on the cover.
Well, I mean, just personally, for me, I thought it's got to, if we're going to have a cover, I just put it forward to the publishers, and whether they use it or not, that's up to them. But they were up for it straight away. So
that's
good news for me. Yeah.
Undoubtedly the best way to go. A very appropriate choice. Excellent. Well, David was involved in a train accident in Cambridgeshire, England, and he sustained severe injuries, but survived the ordeal, obviously. And what followed was a remarkable near-death experience and the equally remarkable development of a number of abilities, talents, and skills that David didn't have before in the aftermath of the NDE. And he's here today to share his truly amazing story with us. So, David, before we get into any questions and answers, why don't I give you the floor, and could you please tell us what happened to you that fateful day of your NDE?
Yeah, sure. It happened at a rail station in Cambridgeshire in the UK. I was seeing a friend off at the station who'd come to visit. I was staying at my sister's with her family for a few weeks. And we'd arrived on the platform at the rail station, and I was helping my friend onto the car with her bags and everything. And as I gave her a hug to say goodbye, I went to step back, and as I did, we heard the alarms going off, the automatic closing doors. So I thought, well, better get off. And as I stepped back, the bottom part of my 3/4 length coat got trapped in the closing doors. And I figured I'd be able to pull it free because I'd been living in London at that stage, and whenever you get on the London Underground, whenever anything gets trapped in those doors, they open automatically. But at this instance, that wasn't the case. And I thought, wow, this isn't good. So I yelled for help. There was no guard on the platform. There wasn't one working on that particular line. So I tried banging on the doors, the windows. I tried every single thing I could, really, and nothing was happening. And I just heard the engine start to rev up, and I started to have an immense amount of fear rush through the whole of my body, and I thought, this is not good. And I looked into the eyes of my friend who I was seeing off, and she was looking straight back at me, and I just saw complete horror in her expression. And that made me feel really scared. Anyhow, the train started to edge out the station, and when I say edge out, it pulled up speed really quick. You don't realise how fast trains actually pull out of a station until you're attached to the outside of one. And the physical pull was just too much for me, and I lost my footing, and I was dragged along the actual platform. And then I was pulled between the platform edge and the speeding train, and then I went under. I was pulled through this sort of dark gap, and it suddenly became, it was no longer like this sort of speeding train. It suddenly became like this huge mechanical beast that I figured was just about to take my life. And I just went into fight or flight mode and decided I wasn't going to let this beast take me. And so I went under. It was like being pulled into a very dark, violent, mechanical sort of experience, like being thrown into a huge tumble dryer at full speed. The whole thing was terrifying, of course, and I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And as I say, I was in fight or flight mode. So I hung on for life, and then I was suddenly thrown down in between the tracks as the train was still continuing on. And I was laid, and I thought, it's not over yet. Keep your face right down into the gravel, which I did do. So I kept my face down there, and then the train continued on, and nothing hit me. And it just kind of like slowly disappeared off. Well, it seemed like slowly. It went at great speed down the track, and there I was lying, looking up at this beautiful blue sky. It was a February day. It's a very cold day, so there wasn't a cloud in the sky. And I remember sort of feeling in touch with nature at that point, and feeling obviously elated to be alive. And I couldn't believe that I was alive. But also a sensation of, wow, I better check my body, check my wounds. And I just looked down. I looked, and this once beautiful sheepskin coat that I'd been wearing that had probably saved my life was now ripped to shreds, and my left arm was ripped right open. And it was bizarre because I thought, right, I'm going to try and call my sister and get her to call an ambulance. And I, of course, my cell phone was completely smashed, so that was not even working, And but within moments, the emergency guys were there. They jumped down on the tracks, started cutting through my clothes. They got me onto a stretcher and into the back of an ambulance. And when I was in the back of that ambulance, the doctor, who went on to really save my life, said, "Look, there's a hospital around the corner where we've just come from, but the nearest one is 25 minutes drive. Can you hang in there?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go." So we sped off down the highway at great speed, and we arrived in the hospital. And when we arrived, there was a whole team of medics waiting as we pulled into the hospital, and I was wheeled in at great speed. And I knew it wasn't all over yet, because I could hear fear in the voices of these medics and consultants that were working on me. It was all science, obviously, going over my head. I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. It was all figures. And I was in immense pain. The pain was just really great. And I knew I was losing a lot of blood, and I started to figure, are they going to save me? Are they going to be able to save me? And the consultant, the head surgeon that was in control of the whole thing, was really calming. And he said, "Look, your family are here. Would you like to see them before we take you into theatre?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to see them." So they all came in. I remember my mother being in tears, and I was saying to my mum, "I'm so sorry, Mum. So is me bringing the dramas to this family." And she said, "Stop it. It's not your fault," which of course it wasn't, And all I could think about was my friend Anna, who I'd been seeing off, because I knew that she'd been through this whole thing with me. You know, as I say, I saw the terror in her eyes, so I figured I need to speak to her. Can you please get her to come over? I could see her at the back of the room, you know, in the emergency department. So she came over. She was completely, you know, white and ashen and really completely in a state of shock. And I said, "Are you okay?" And she was just, her head was going from side to side. She said, "I can't believe you're alive. They announced that you were dead over the tannoy system, you know, the speaker system at the station." And so, and it was at that point that I left my body. You know, I left the emergency department. I left all the pain I was in and the drama of the hospital, and I was suddenly in what appeared to be a beautiful darkened space. And it wasn't a foreboding sort of darkness. In fact, on the contrary, I felt really safe. I felt completely safe immediately, even though I figured at that stage that this must be it. This must be death, that I hadn't seen it through and I hadn't survived. But I went with it. I was greeted by these beautiful colors, these colors of orbs of color, like reds, greens, ambers, yellows, greens, slowly pulsating all around me. And they were like pulsating like almost like landing lights on an airport as you're coming into land, you know. And I just thought, this is making me feel safe wherever I am. This is good. And I tried to get my bearings, you know. I tried to find out, because I realised I was no longer laid on the hospital trolley that I'd been on throughout all this time, and I felt that I was on a different texture altogether. I was on a huge rock, basically. It was like a medieval altar, is the best way for me to describe it, and it was like this huge slate rock. But I felt surprisingly comfortable laid out on this rock, despite the fact I was no longer clothed. I was just covered in like this blue satin sort of silky textured material, which is almost like a comfort blanket in a sense. You know, it was making me feel like, you know, okay, this is good. And I checked my body. I checked my wounds. I looked down. I looked at my left arm, which I'd seen had been cut, had been severed, you know, and everything was in place. Not even a single scratch or scar or bruise, nothing, you know. And I just thought, wow, this is amazing. This is like, everything's okay. I'm feeling good. I'm looking physically good. I'm going to go with this. So I just laid my head back and I closed my eyes and I relaxed in this beautiful space. And then suddenly I saw light coming through my eyelids, and you know, and so I opened my eyes slowly and I looked up, and there were like three symmetrical grids of white light that were slowly closing in on me above my head, my face. And this light was just so intense. It was like a very bright, intense white light that in this realm would be too bright for the human eye to be able to look into, you know. But in this sphere, I could look straight into it. And in fact, I couldn't take my gaze away, because it was more than just light. It felt like a healing light. I felt there's a healing process coming from this light, and I was captivated by it. So, and I felt like this light was healing all the shock my body had just been through, you know, that my whole, you know, my body and soul and whatever had just been through, and it felt like it was healing all the wounds and the shock process. And so I closed my eyes and went with this. And as I did, I suddenly felt the presence of somebody had arrived at the scene, if you like. You know, I felt somebody had almost walked into this darkened space. So I lifted my head and opened my eyes, and there stood at my feet was this person, this androgynous person, with this very white blonde hair and this skin that was glowing light from within, and wearing a very simple contemporary black t-shirt, which I found really surprising, because I figured if this was the next stage of life, I was expecting something more ethereal, you know. But no, it was a simple contemporary black t-shirt, and I looked into the eyes of this person, and I said, "I know your face. I couldn't figure where from. I was going, where do I know you from? And this person kept smiling back at me with a knowing smile. And I thought, okay, well, I feel safe with you. And I actually felt there was more than that. I felt that this person was like almost like the gatekeeper for this whole process that was starting to unfold. And so with that knowledge, I just closed my eyes and put my head back on this rock again. And this energy that I was feeling from the light, this energy of healing that had been healing my body and everything, was suddenly becoming more intense. It felt like it was going deeper. And so I opened my eyes and looked, and I realized now that there were two more female forms either side of me. The female form to my right was quite European, white Caucasian, with a simple brown dress on again, with long brown hair, but with dark skin. Whereas the female form to my left was more sort of American Indian, Asian Indian, or South American, and she was wearing a more traditional, beautiful dress. And but they had their hands slowly hovering over the contours of my body, and I could feel like this energy coming from their hands was. I describe it as being like an energy of beautiful, unconditional love, that was just going through. And this was going deeper than just the trauma of my body. This was going down to the depth of my soul. It was almost like every layer that I carried with me throughout my life, all the baggage, as we call it, was being peeled off bit by bit. And they were getting down to the pure essence of my soul. This was just like an incredibly liberating feeling, because my life had, like all of us, we all carry that baggage, no matter what, and there are elements of some people have deeper amounts of baggage, and for me, I had quite a lot, so I was carrying quite a bit, but it was just so liberating to suddenly feel like this for the first time in my life. So I closed my eyes again and went with this whole process, and was going into a real sense of almost like a meditative trance. It was just beautiful. And I started to think about my family, think about the trauma that they'd been going through, understandably, especially my parents, seeing my mother in tears. So I tried to edge my way over the edge of this huge rock, hoping to see them, because I thought if I do, I'll be looking down down into the hospital. So I looked down, and as I did look down, I didn't see them. I didn't see them at all. But what I did see was this incredibly awe-inspiring sort of sight. It was like I described it as being like a waterfall of stars. It was the size of Victoria Falls, Niagara Falls, but instead of millions of tons of water cascading over the edge, it was billions of stars sparkling and flying over the edge and shooting stars, going right over them and falling down into the middle. So I looked down, I was going, wow, this is incredible. Clearly I'm not in a small darkened space at all. I suddenly became aware that I was in the universe itself, which was an amazing, liberating experience again. And I looked down, and it's like I was trying to focus, and the more I focused, I realized I was looking down into one galaxy into another, and I was looking into infinity. I was looking into nebulas and colors, all these different forms that I'd never seen before, and to me, I'd never really had much interest in the universe itself. I barely looked up into the night sky and even studied the stars. So this was like a whole incredible experience for me. And so I pulled myself over, and it's interesting because normally me of old would have felt guilt and shame that I couldn't see my family and worry. And I thought, oh God, I can't see them. But there was none of that at all. I remember just bringing myself over and thinking, okay, I can't see them now, but they'll be okay. They'll figure this out. And if they don't, I know it's going to take time for them, but they will ultimately be experiencing this realm themselves at some point. And if we meet, then great. If we don't, we don't, So it was all very sort of like nothing seemed to worry me at all. And that was nothing to do with a lack of concern for them. It's just that was just like my state of mind was just or state of being was completely altered. So I laid my head back and went with this healing process, and it continued on. And then I suddenly felt this energy that had been coming through the grids of white light and the hands of the healers was suddenly intensified. And it was like a dial had been turned up, and then I felt like every single molecule of my body was starting to vibrate with this energy of beautiful love. So I lifted my head again and I looked, and just beyond the androgynous being who was stood there and the two female forms was this huge tunnel of white light that was slowly closing in, coming through the universe itself and getting closer and closer. And it was like a vibration was coming from it. It was again, it was an awe-inspiring sight, and normally it would be quite terrifying because as it closed in on me, it was surrounded by huge dramatic flames that were like slowly circulating all the way around. But there was no fear whatsoever. All I could feel was excitement and wow, and I just enjoyed this presence. And because what I realized, what I was looking into here was the source of all creation. This was God. This wasn't like the image of God that I'd always imagined God would look like, in my textbooks from school, or the images of the guy with the grey beard on the ceiling of the Vatican in Rome. No, this was a huge tunnel of white light that was the source of all creation. And it was at that moment of great realization that I suddenly came crashing back into my body in the hospital, and I was suddenly there back. It's like I remember the transition from that was like sort of like very brash. The fluorescent strip in the hospital was very bright in my eyes, and the noise was too on overload, and the pain came rushing through. It was very, very, the contrast was very, very brash. But it didn't matter because many people say to me, "You must have been really gutted and disappointed after all that beauty to come back to all that." But I didn't feel like that actually, because I come back from this beautiful realm and I felt like I was still attached to it. I felt like I got an umbilical cord, if you like, attached to this other beautiful realm, and the energy was still coming through me. I was supercharged, and I was just thinking, why have they sent me back? What is my mission? What is my goal?
It really does. I'm sorry to interrupt, David, but it really does. What an amazing story. First of all, jaw-dropping, absolutely remarkable. And it really does seem like you still carry that energy with you, even now in retelling the story. You're very animated. You go into great detail, very, very colorful telling of what happened to you. Do you feel like in some ways you're still connected with the energy that you encountered in the other realm?
Yes, I do. It's something that's remained with me actually throughout. I was scared I was going to forget it. I thought, because I knew nothing about near-death experiences or anything like this at all, and so it was a real fear element I was going to forget it. But I never have done, because it's unlike, say, for example, some people say that some people talk about dreams and stuff like that, and dreams are often chaotic, and not only that. Over time, even if you've had a really powerful dream, I'm not comparing it to a dream, but if you had a very powerful dream in your life, it's still, the story changes over the years, and it becomes kind of it starts to warp. Whereas with this, a near-death experience, it was ultra real. It was so incredibly ultra real that it remains with you. But not only that, it was so beautiful. That each time I tell the story, I never tire of it, because I'm kind of back in that space, if you like, not really tempted to be back in it, but I can't help it each time I talk about it, because it's such a strong presence.
That was actually a question that I planned to ask you. Do you ever tire of telling the story? Does it ever cease to amaze you? Are you still amazed every time you tell it?
No, that's it. I never do. It's really interesting. I never do tire of it, and I never tire of being asked at all. It's just I'm always grateful if people do want to ask about it. It's lovely. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Luckily for us, you're willing to share it because it really is a remarkable story. And as I said, you remember it in such detail and in such a colorful way. You explain it in such a colorful way that you really convey what it was all about.
Thank you.
So many questions about the NDE, David. First of all, you mentioned the beings that you encountered, the three beings that you encountered in the other realm. You said there was a bit of familiarity with one of them in particular. Reflecting upon it, what do you think? Who were the beings? Were they spirit guides? Were they possibly deceased relatives? Who do you think these beings were, and what was the connection with them?
Yeah, I know that they weren't deceased relatives because there was no recognition of that at all. As time has gone on, when we talked earlier about me still being connected to the other realm, it's like there was information slowly coming through when I was in that near-death experience itself, but the information is still trickling through now, and it's started to make a clearer picture even as time has gone on. And what I've realized is that even though I was confused at the time as to who that person was, and I knew that person, it wasn't just a physical knowing, it was just like a knowing that person really deeply. So what I've realized is that person in the black t-shirt is my higher self, and my higher self has been with me throughout not only this life but my previous lives, and but also the other two female forms. I also believe that all three have been with me throughout. All the tough times that I was going through in my life before, they were there, but I just couldn't tap into them because I wasn't spiritually awakened at all in any sense of the word. Spirituality or had no play in my life. So they were there. And we've all got them. We've all got our own personal spirit guides or angels or guardian angels, all these different phrases that we like to use, which I'm open to people having their own take on, which is fine. But for me, yeah, so that one person that I knew, that androgynous being, which is interesting that person was androgynous because, let's say in terms of in my reincarnations, maybe, I could have gone through male, female takes throughout my past lives and stuff like that, so yes.
Right. So that all makes sense if the being was androgynous, and if in reincarnation we incarnate in different genders, that the androgynous nature of that being would encompass all those genders.
Exactly, yeah.
Right, it makes sense. And it's really intriguing to hear you say that some of these realizations weren't instant, but they really came to you over an extended period of time upon reflection.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
So the NDE really, so it still really is with you in a very profound way to this day, the NDE.
Yeah, it is. And I figure that's because, I decided to sort of take things further, I was led, actually, I was guided, I should say, to sort of take things further and start sort of conveying what had happened to me creatively through creative formats. And because of that creativity has continued. So that means that the deeper I go into the creative formats, the more I'm learning myself, which is great.
Right, we never stop learning.
No, we don't. Yeah, exactly.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Even the great sort of spiritual teachers, they never stop learning. And any one spiritual teacher who turns around and says that yes, they've got all the answers and they know them all, they're not to be trusted.
Indeed.
In my book, anyway.
I'm going to misquote. I certainly see your point, and I'm sure I'm misquoting this, but it's something along the lines of, the more we know, the more we realize that we don't know a whole lot. There's so much out there to learn, really.
Exactly.
Indeed. Wow. About, again, related to the NDE and the other realm, the tunnel of light, sort of putting together what you just explained to us here in the show and what you wrote in your book. Was the tunnel with the intense light, was that God in and of itself? Did it lead to God? Did it have any sort of physical form or gender? How would you define it? Is it this ineffable sort of experience and something that you really can't put into words, or how would you define it?
Yeah, it was. Well, I realised straight away that this was God, and that God wasn't. It was almost like a moment of telepathy, really. You know, I realised. I thought, this is. So we were talking about me getting all of these bits of information that's still coming through now, but that I got that straight away, that what I was looking at was God, and not in the usual human form. Which was fine for me. You know, I didn't challenge it and stuff, and I guess that was the moment that I was sent back, because I'd made one of the biggest realizations, you know, for me anyhow. I know that some people who've had near-death experiences talk about the fact that they actually enter that tunnel of white light and they do continue their journey onwards and stuff. And each person who's had a near-death experience, there are many similarities. I realise that, but there are lots of differences as well. But I guess we've all got different parts of our journey from the lives that we've lived in our past lives that have taken us to need to want to enter that tunnel or what have you. But for me, I didn't need to. It's almost like I didn't want to. I wasn't resisting it. You know, I didn't even feel the sense that I was supposed to enter it at all. But it was just, I guess, yeah, I got the answer for myself at that point, that this was God. And this was the source of all creation. That God is the light, you know, and you know, which is interesting, because I'm starting to listen to, filter through some of Jesus' teachings now, and realize that some of the stuff that's in the Bible is talking all about that. He's talking about, you know, that God is light, and the light is within us all, you know. And I'm not phrasing that very well, because I'm not very good at quoting from the Bible, and so I'm not attempting to. So if I'm offending any Christians, I'm sorry, but I just basically trying to say that you can see that that's where a lot of what Jesus' teachings were. We're talking about light. Light comes an awful lot into his teachings. So yeah, so
Right.
it makes an awful lot of sense.
So it sounds, I'll be asking you a couple of questions about this in a few moments, but it really sounds like you've been inspired to do a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of contemplating on spiritual issues ever since the NDE occurred.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was one of the first things that I wanted to do, actually. You know, when I first came back, I wanted to try and figure out what had happened and why it had happened. You know, because as I said earlier, I knew nothing about near-death experiences at all, and I just figured at that point, am I the only person that this has happened to? And if so, you know, how am I going to tell the whole world about this without them, you know, switching off straight away and saying this guy's crazy, you know? Because it was important to me to be able to tell everybody, not to say, hey, this happened to me. It was more like saying, listen, you know, life doesn't just stop here. You know, it continues on. This is the next stage of life. I thought I've got to tell everybody, and it's something that I've never shied away from. So,
Right, incredible. Well, getting back to one aspect of the NGE that's intriguing, looking over, thinking that you might see your family in the hospital and seeing, as you describe it, a waterfall of stars. What do you think first of all, do you think that was intentional? Do you think that the beings, the light, intended for you to see that? Was it meant to be a teaching experience? Or was it random
absolutely.
that you saw it? Was it intentional? Was there intent?
Yeah, the intention being was that, as I said to you also, for me, my life had been very linear. It had been very on, you know, sort of two-dimensional. You know, I just kind of like nonchalantly looked up at the sky every now and again and saw stars and thought, okay, that's the blackness of night, and those are the stars that twinkle. And rather than actually realizing that we're all part of the universe, you know, and we've all forgotten it. You know, we've all evolved as mankind, you know, so far, which is great. But we've forgotten that we're part of the animal kingdom. We've forgotten that we're led by not only the laws of Mother Earth, but the laws of the universe itself. So that moment was teaching me that we are all part of that universal energy, because I felt that sense of being part of the universe, and it was really exciting. And not only that, it's I'm fascinated by watching documentaries now on science. Even though I was non-scientific before, and I love hearing what they have to say about it. I love watching documentaries with the old Apollo astronauts, and what their take was of flying out into the universe, and what they felt about it, and whether they're the scientists of all sciences, so they're just going to talk about science. But no, a lot of them were turning around saying it was an amazing experience, standing on the moon, looking back at Earth. We've all heard those speeches, haven't we? And they're talking about how, looking back at Earth, they realised that, or when they came back through the Earth's atmosphere, they realised that heaven is here on Earth, that we live on this beautiful planet. So it's that was my way of sort of like appreciating that we are all led by the laws of the universe, and that we're part of that universal energy.
It really is interesting. That's really well phrased. It really is interesting, isn't it, that a lot of the findings of modern science seem to back up what some religious traditions have been saying for an extremely long time. There's an interesting intersection there between some of the findings of modern science and traditional philosophical religious thought. And it seems like what you experienced seems to be interconnection, the interconnectedness of all things. We're not in isolation. We are the universe. We're connected to everything else in the universe. Yeah. And that seems to be what you're saying, that you learned from seeing a waterfall of stars in front of you. That seems to be very much what you experienced.
That's it, exactly.
Wow, great, amazing. You mentioned an interesting one. You mentioned that you didn't decide to come back to this realm, that it sounds like the decision was made for you. At that time, in that space, if the decision had been up to you, what do you think you would have done? Would you have come back, or would you have stayed?
Well, that's interesting, I think, because I've since come across people who've had near-death experiences, who had a lot more to live for. They got young kids, they got a family, and so they were trying to reject what was happening, and they were trying to bring themselves back. They said, "No, you can't take me," kind of thing. But I guess for me, I didn't want to die. I got no sense of that. But my life had been in such a mess, and also the horror of the whole accident itself, that it was just such a beautiful feeling to suddenly be given this beautiful chance to engage in this beauty. So I was in no rush to come back. So I don't think I would have been quite happy to have continued on. And because I figured that I was dead, this was the next stage. So there was no sense of me saying I need to return. So there was. I was in no hurry, so I would have been quite happy to have continued the journey on in this amazing space. But that wasn't to be. The choice was made, that he'd learned enough, that let's send him back now with these tools, and let's see where he takes it from there.
That was part one of my interview with David, and what a remarkable story he has to tell. Be sure to join us for part two to hear the rest of the interview with David. He'll be telling us about some of the transformations he experienced after the NDE, some of the amazing abilities he developed, and insights stemming from what he learned from the experience. It will undoubtedly open your mind to new ways of being in the world. See you next time here at On Spirit Today.